All right, this is part 2 of the video, and this is teaching you the new stuff, which is word problems. And for word problems, before we can do them, we need to know two different things. The first is the angle of depression, and then the angle of elevation. So the angle of depression, if you imagined an invisible line that went right here, parallel to the bottom, this angle right here is the angle of depression. Okay, and it's not sad, it's going down. So we'll make X right here the angle of depression. Now, I know we've only been doing trig for a couple days, but never have we solved for an angle that's outside of the triangle. Everything's been inside. So the way this works is that these two angles right here form a right angle. So to get this one, I can do 90 minus X. All right, and last but not least, the angle of elevation is always at the bottom right corner. So this one is the angle of elevation. Now, these two words are not, well, first of all, they're never used at the same problem. It's always one or the other, and they're not used in every problem, but they're used in some. And so we need to make sure that we know what it means when we get there. So let's talk about the first one. So we have a ski slope is 550 yards long with a vertical drop of 130. Find the angle of depression. Now, when you're doing these problems, they will always form a right triangle. Otherwise, this is not going to work with our right triangle chapter and our right triangle strategies. So I know we don't all ski, but I'm sure that all of us know that skiing happens on a mountain. So we've got our nice little hill, and there's our skier. All right, so now we need to take the information in the problem and label it on our picture. So it said the slope is 550 yards. So the slope is what they ski on. In this case, it happens to be the hypotenuse. So then it said there's a vertical drop of 130. So if you remember, vertical is up and down, horizontal is left and right, but it's vertical, so this is 130. Then it says find the angle of depression. Well, if we look at our picture above, the angle of depression is outside of the triangle. So it is X right here. Now I can't solve directly for X. So what I'm going to do is solve for Y. And once I know Y, I can subtract it from 90 to get X. So let's see if we can solve it. So looking at Y, I'm going to label it. This is adjacent. This is hypotenuse. So now that would be the cosine. So I'm going to take the cosine of my angle, which is Y, equals adjacent 130 over hypotenuse 550. And now I'm going to put that in my calculator, but to do so, since I'm solving for an angle, I'm going to do the inverse cosine of 130 over 550. So in my calculator, again, mode needs to be in that degree. Okay, so I'm going to do the inverse cosine of 130 divided by 550. And we're finding an angle measure, so we're rounding to the nearest whole degree. So when I do that, y equals 76 degrees. But that is not the angle I want. The angle I want is x. So to get x, I'm going to do 90 minus 76. And that will give me x, and 90 minus 76 is 14. So my angle of depression is 14 degrees, which is a small angle. But that's good news, because unless you're crazy, when you're skiing, you don't want to plummet down the hill. You just want to gracefully go down the hill. All right, next one. A tree is 50 feet high. So again, we're going to draw our right triangle, because that's going to happen in every one. A tree in general is straight up. So here's my tree. So this measurement is 50, and it casts a shadow. Now, I know shadows can appear in a lot of different places, but in general, when you're thinking about trees, the shadow of the tree can be seen on the ground. And for these word problems, the shadow is always going to be on the ground. So this is 62. Then it says, find the measure of the angle of elevation of the sun. Well, it doesn't matter what they want you to find the angle of elevation of. As long as it says the phrase angle of elevation, that is the bottom right angle. So now that we have our picture, 50 is opposite. This is adjacent. So my trig function is tangent. So I'm going to take the tangent of my angle measure, x, equals opposite 50 and adjacent 62. So to solve, x is the inverse tangent of 50 over 62. So in my calculator, I'll do second tangent, and then I have 50 divided by 62. It's an angle. I'm going to round to the nearest whole degree, which in this case would give me 39 degrees. Now, on this one, the angle of elevation is in the triangle, so I do not have to subtract it from 90. The only time you're doing the subtracting from 90 thing is when we're doing the angle of depression. All right, after flying an altitude of 9 kilometers, an airplane starts to descend when its ground distance is 175. Find the angle of depression for this portion of the flight. All right, well, even if we don't fly, we can figure a few things out. Descend means to go down. So here's my airplane and it is headed down. It says that it's an altitude of 9 kilometers. Altitude is another word for height, and it's measured straight up and down. So this is 9. Then it says that its ground distance, so that's got to be on the bottom, is 175. And we want to find the angle of depression. Okay, well, angle of depression is always outside of the triangle. It's up there. But we can't solve for x, so instead we're going to solve for y. And then once we know y, we'll subtract it from 90 to get x. But again, the subtracting from 90 part is only when it says angle of depression. So looking at y, this is opposite, this is adjacent. So my trig function will be tangent. So I have the tangent of my angle measure equals 175 over 9. All right, I'm not going to write that, but to find the angle, we do the inverse tangent. So I have the inverse tangent of 175 divided by 9. And to the nearest, because it's a degree, I round to the nearest whole degree, so that's 87. So x is 87, but that's not, just kidding, that was not what we were solving for. We were solving for y, weren't we? That's completely my fault. But now y equals 87. To get x, we're going to do 90 minus 87, and that will give us x, which is just 3 degrees, which again is really small, but this is great news because no one wants their plane plummeting to the ground. That's never a good thing. Okay, a trolley car rises vertically 40 feet, horizontal 630. Okay, so again, it has to be a right triangle, so just start there. Okay, if the trolley car is rising, that means it's going up, so I'll put my trolley car at the bottom. It's rising vertically 40. We talked about that. Vertically is straight up and down. Horizontal distance, 630. Horizontal is left and right, so that's this one. What is the angle of elevation? And it doesn't matter what it's the angle of elevation of. If it's got those 3 words, then x is going to be in the bottom right corner. So looking at x, this is opposite, this is adjacent, so that's tangent. So I have the tangent of x equals opposite 40 over adjacent 630. So to solve, I'm going to do the inverse tangent of 40 divided by 630. So the inverse tangent of 40 divided by 630, and it's an angle, so we're round to the nearest whole degree. So that would be 4 degrees. And again, it's small, but that's okay because the trolley car has a lot of work to do to get up the hill. Okay, if we turn over to the last page, try another one where we're not solving for an angle and it actually doesn't use elevation or depression. All right, so again, we have to have a right triangle. That's going to happen every time. A ladder is leaning against a house. So we have done enough of these word problems to know the ladder is always the hypotenuse. Okay, it's leaning against the house and makes an angle of 55 degrees to the ground. So the ladder makes an angle with the ground. So here's the ladder where the stripes are. The ground is on the bottom. So in between the ladder and the ground would be this measurement right here. But that's not x. It told us what it was. It's 55. All right, then it says the foot, which is the bottom of the ladder, is 6 feet from the foundation of the house. That's the bottom of the house. So the bottom of the ladder to the bottom of the house is 6 feet. We want to find the length of the ladder, so we're finding this measurement. All right, so looking at my angle measure, this is adjacent and this is hypotenuse. So my trig function is going to be cosine. So the cosine of 55 equals adjacent over hypotenuse. This time, my variable was on the bottom, so that means I'm going to have to divide. So x, denominator divide, they both start with d. So I have 6 over the cosine of 55. Always do the number first before the trig function. So I have 6 divided by the cosine of 55, which gives me, now this is a length. This is no longer an angle, so I'm rounding to the nearest hundredth, 10.46. And we need a label. Well, they said it was feet. So that's it. So it's about 10.5 feet long is our letter. Perfect. All right, next one. Bob's flying a kite. Again, we have to have a right triangle. Well, Bob should be on the ground, so we're going to put Bob here. The kite has got to be up in the air, right? And the kite is attached to a string. Well, your string doesn't always go straight up. Your string actually goes at a slight angle when you're flying a kite. Okay? The kite string, which we just labeled as the hypotenuse, makes an angle of 55 degrees to the ground. Well, the string is the hypotenuse. The ground has got to be the bottom. So the angle in between them is 55 degrees. If Bob is standing 100 feet from the point on the ground directly below the kite, well, we see where Bob is. And if we go 100, or we go straight down from the kite, Bob is 100 feet from that point. So that is 100. We want to know how long the string is. Well, we said this one was a string. So looking at 55, this would be adjacent. This would be hypotenuse. So we'd use our cosine, which we'll use a lot in these word problems, cosine and tangent, but sine does happen. Cosine of 55 equals adjacent 100 over hypotenuse x. X is in the denominator. Denominator starts with D, so I'm going to divide. So I'm going to always have the number divided by the trig. Now I'm going to put this in my own handheld calculator because it won't take us long to flip back and forth, but you should know how to put it in your calculator now. 100 divided by the cosine of 55. Whoops, mine's in the wrong mode. Now it's actually going slower. So here we are. All right, so that's going to give me 174.34, and we are in feet. We got a big old kite. If you go to the beach ever, you can see them. All right, next one, the angle of elevation, blah, blah, blah. So let's draw a right triangle because all of these have a right triangle. It's a non-negotiable. Okay, the angle of elevation from the point on the ground to the top of the cliff is 38. It doesn't matter what comes with it. If it uses those 3 words, it goes in the bottom right corner. So 38 goes in the bottom right corner. If the point, okay, so this goes to a point on the ground. So here's my point. If the point is 80 feet from the base of the cliff, well, the base of the cliff has got to be the bottom. So this has got to be X. How high is the cliff? Well, the cliff is going to be the one that's going straight up and down. So this is X, and I shouldn't have put X there. I should have put 80 because it told us it was 80. I apologize. All right, so it's angle of elevation, bottom right. We got a point on the ground, and the cliff is 80 feet from it, and then we want to know how high the cliff is. All right, so looking at this, we've got opposite, and we've got adjacent, so that's going to give us tangent. So the tangent of my angle measure equals opposite over adjacent. So that's going to be X over 80. Now, X is on top, so now I'm going to multiply. So I have 80 times the tangent of 38. And because it is a side length, I'm going to round to the nearest hundredth. So that's going to give me 62.50. Make sure we label, and we've got feet. Okay, 2 more. We're getting there. Draw a right triangle. Doesn't matter what the problem is. I know you can do that part. From the top of the tower, the angle of depression, as long as we have that, we know where it goes. It doesn't matter it's angle of depression or what. Irrelevant. Just looking for those words. It's 72 degrees. Angle of depression is always outside on top. The top of the tower is 80 feet above the ground. So this has got to be my tower over here. So this is 80 feet. How far is the stake from the foot of the ground? Okay, so the stake has got to be in the ground over here. So we want to know how far the stake is, which is here to the foot of the tower to the bottom. So that's here. Now this is all fine, except we can't solve using 72. we need to know an angle inside of the triangle. So to get that angle, we'll do 90 minus 72, which gives us 18 degrees. And that's what we're going to use for our problem. So looking at 18, this is opposite, this is adjacent. So I'm going to say the tangent of my angle, which is 18. Now, granted, 72 was given, but to solve the triangle, I need the 18 equals opposite over adjacent. So that's x over 80. And we can see that x is in the top. That means I'm going to multiply. And we always do the number first. So we have 80 times the tangent of 18. So 80 times the tangent of 18 gives me 25.9935. But if I'm rounding to the nearest hundredth, that's going to be 25.99. And this is also feet. Okay, last one. A tree. We've done a tree before, so we can do this again. So here's my tree. Typically, the tree is going to go straight up and down for the most part. A 40-foot high tree. So this is 40. Cast a shadow. Shadows of trees for these word problems are on the ground. It's 58 feet long. Find the measure of the angle of elevation. Doesn't matter what it's the angle of elevation of. It's always in the bottom right corner. So this is x. All right, so looking at x, this is opposite. This is adjacent. So we're going to use the tangent. So I have the tangent of my angle measure equals opposite over adjacent. So to solve, I'm going to do the inverse tangent. That is not at all what I meant to write. Let's try this again. X equals the inverse tangent of 40 over 58. And so I'm going to put that into my handheld calculator, but you can do it in yours. And now this is an angle measure, so rounding to the nearest whole degree, I got 34.59, so to the nearest whole degree, be 35 degrees. All right, now you have the information to complete your quiz review, and then next class I will be here and we'll practice and review for the quiz before we take it.